built these simple reports here. One of them is built using pivot tables, as you can see, and the second one is built entirely using formulas. And in particular, we are using a simple SUMIF function here to build this particular report. So when we say that pivot tables do not update in real time, whereas formulas do, this is what we mean. For example, you can see we have our sales table, we have the date, and also have the products, and also have the sales column. Now, if in case maybe this was a file that your colleagues do work from and they update anything here, of course, these numbers here with this particular report will update automatically. But for this report, you need to do a simple refresh. Let us come in here and intentionally change some of the numbers. For example, I will change this transaction here. I will change the number and make it as 0, just intentionally to check. And what happens here when I hit enter key? You see these numbers changing. All right, together. When I do that, you see we have this number reducing for banana as a product because we have changed these numbers here. If I move forward and also remove this particular value and reduce it to 0, similarly, you will see these numbers here where we used formulas update automatically. Whereas with the pivot table report, you can see we still have our numbers that we originally had even before these particular changes had not yet happened. Okay. Now, if you want to update this report, one thing you can do is to head over to your data tab and you come over to the refresh button and say refresh all. Or if you don't do that, what you can do is to come over to this particular report and right mouse click, then you say refresh. So with this particular action, we are just refreshing one single report. But when we actually move over, and there you go, you can see the numbers now tally. And when you actually come over to the data tab and use the refresh button, you're refreshing every single pivot table report that you have in your worksheet. Whether these pivot tables are coming from the same data source or they are coming from one single source, once you use this particular option here of refresh all, everything in this particular worksheet will update, or this workbook will update automatically. Let me hope that you get the difference. So you need to choose which options do you want to use in future as you carry on your data analysis. And this is key to remember. Remember, when we are introducing ourselves to data analysis, we said that if you're actually maybe starting off using the tool like Excel to do your data analysis, it may become very hard for you to remember the formulas here. Are we together? Especially when the report starts to get complex. But it's very easy to build a pivot table report. Like I'll be demonstrating, it's quite easy to build a pivot table report, even if you're completely green and you can't remember the formulas, you've taken some time, maybe you're completely new to Microsoft Excel. Pivot tables are very easy to construct. You don't have to remember the syntax of functions. You do not have to remember the function names and so on and so forth. Okay. Now, why do you think that pivot tables love tables so much? Pivot table and Excel tables, I believe you get the difference. An Excel table, like we did mention, is a structured reference that we use. But again, pivot tables, like any other data analysis tool, they love to work with structured references. I did give this particular example here for our normal range. This is a normal raw data that we can use to build reports together, and we shall do that in just a moment. And in other instances, when we actually convert our proper raw data into a table, what are some of the behaviors that you will notice? One of them I've just explained here, that tables provide that dynamic or update or real-time updates of your data. Get the idea? Now let's come over here and write a simple VLOOKUP formula that will produce or pick for us the sales here. And this will be our table array where we're going to be picking the retail price. And once we print it here, we shall now multiply by the units sold and we get our total sales, so that we can demonstrate how dynamic Excel tables are. But before we do that practically, let's go through some of the reasons why pivot tables or any other data analysis tool loves to work with structured references. Number one, we have discussed that they provide dynamic ranges, and this means that when we need or remove, or sorry, when we add or remove records from the table, are we there? Anything that is pointing to that particular table, be it a formula, be it a pivot table, be it Power Query, Power Pivot, and so on, including the charts or visuals, they can be updated immediately. So that's why we need a structured reference. Are we there? Now, the other reason is data from an Excel worksheet must be in an Excel table before it can be imported to tools like Power Query and Power Pivot. So that's why it's a great deal to work with pivot, sorry, with tables or structured references. Together, and that's one of the reasons why pivot tables as well love to work with structured references. Are we there? So in simple terms, is that all data analysis tools or data analytics tools inside Microsoft Excel, like Power Pivot, like Power Query, like pivot tables themselves, they love to work with structured references, like I have actually demonstrated here. But let us do a simple VLOOKUP here. I'll say equals VLOOKUP so that we can complete this particular table. I'll say equals VLOOKUP. And for the lookup value, we shall go with the product ID that is known to us, comma, and for the table array, we shall highlight this entire table. So I'll just move over this particular cell, holding Ctrl Shift. I move to the right, and also using my arrow pointing down, I highlight this entire range. Okay, F4 on the keyboard to lock it, and the column index number that we'd like to return from, I'll count from the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think there are 5. And the fifth column is the column that contains our retail price. So I'll put a 5 here, and we are interested in an exact match. I'll say 0 and close off the VLOOKUP from here. We seem to be getting an error here, a href error. Let me check. 1, 2, 3, 4. So we have given a column number that is outside the range that we actually have. I did do a poor counting right there. But again, you can automate that for those people who have attended our VLOOKUP classes. We can always automate the column index number argument so that you don't make such a mistake. So let us edit this and put a 4 and close off the formula. From here, you can see this returns the price of this particular product here based on the product ID. Now, what we can do is to multiply that value with the summation or the aggregate value. We can now drag this formula to the rest of the cells. Now, what we shall do here to test how dynamic these tables are is I'm going to be doing a simple sum function here for this entire range. And then what we shall do is to come over and convert this one into a structured reference, which is a table. Okay, let's do that. I'll highlight this entire range, Control T on the keyboard, convert this into a table, and then I say okay. So now this is a structured reference. I'll come back here to the table design and give it a name. Maybe I can call this one sample data. Make sure that in your name there is no space. Just call it sample data. And I also convert this one into a table. Control T and confirm that your table has headers, and then say okay. Are we there? Now let us write the same VLOOKUP here. I say equals VLOOKUP. Equals VLOOKUP. So the lookup value will still be our range. Our product ID that is known to us, and the table array shall actually highlight this entire table. But in case, let me just go back and give it a name so that I can refer to it in my formula. So I'll just go back to table design. Let's call this one D, and then I'll say products maybe, and then say enter, and then come back here and say equals VLOOKUP. For the lookup value will be our product ID that is known to us. And the table array, I'll go with D products. That's the table array. And for the column, or the column index number that we want to return from is a 4. And we are doing an exact match as well. And there you go. You can see our numbers populating. We can confirm. These numbers will not be the same because we may not have the same units sold here, but we can confirm that after doing a simple multiplication for the units that were sold. Are you together? And there you go. Now, let's also come back here and generate our totals or our simple summation for this particular table. And there you go. Now, what we mean by real-time updates is that when this particular table grows, are we there? This particular total here might not easily update. Are you together? Because this is not a structured range. Are we there? Let's do that practically. Today is, I think, 9th of February 2024. And maybe let's create a transaction for one of our products. And that product, let's go with 1043, which is Apple. And then the units here, we shall put it 45. And there you go. You can see this range will update, but this simple summation here will not. Why? Because this is not a structured reference. So in other words, whenever you're working with pivot tables, make sure that the source data in most cases should be a structured reference. Let's try the same here and observe what happens to our numbers. I'll come back here and say today is 9th of February 2024. You can see everything is updating in real time. You can see right here we have an error, but we believe that after we punch in all these numbers here, that error should be able to clean, as you can see, because we never had the product ID, so that's why we get a hash NEM error right here. Now let us punch in 45 like we did previously, and there you go. You can see the summation here will update automatically, whereas for our normal range, we shall not get this one updating. If we want this one to update, is you have to right mouse click, sorry, you have to double click in the formula and then expand this range manually. Once you expand this range like this and hit enter, your numbers will update as well. So those are some of the reasons why pivot tables love to work with structured references. Okay, now we have our raw data. I believe last time we left off, we had started analyzing this particular data set, but let us start from the scratch for the interest of our new people who are joining us for the first time. Okay, so we have this raw data that we'd like to use, and would like to use pivot tables to draw some analysis or to bring out some reports. And one of the things that we need to do first is to understand this data set. What is inside this particular data? Okay, we shall go column per column and understand this raw data, because that's very critical. You cannot start on any analysis without going through the data set to understand it. So I believe this is sales data, or I don't know, but you can call it anything of your choice, because I can see I have region here in the first column, I have the countries, I have the item types. I believe this is sales data. I also have the sales channel. I can also activate Ctrl+Shift+L. I activate my drop down list for the filters. I can double check if we have empty rows. I believe there is no empty rows. This data seems to be completely clean. So I can double check here. I can see I have order priorities. All right. I also have the order date. So you see, this might be sales data. That's what is coming to my mind. And I can move forward and go through all the columns. Are we together? That's a normal practice. That's a norm that you should actually make sure that you have on your fingertip. Before you start working out any reports, understand the data first. Okay? And we also have this new data that we shall use to update or to grow our source data. Now let us go in here and see, how do we create a pivot table? Of course, that is a question that you might be asking yourself. How do we create a pivot table? Then after we do that, we shall now understand a few things to do with the pivot table in terms of customizing the pivot table fields pane, and also understanding the pivot table analyze, and then the design contextual tabs. We shall go through a number of commands that you may work with, or a number of things that you may need to know when it comes to customizing your pivot table reports. Okay, how do we create a pivot table? All right, let's go back to our raw data and click in this particular range. So this is being a table, there are so many options that you can use to create a pivot table. One of them is clicking anywhere in your raw data and come over to the table design, and then you can say summarize with a pivot table. That's option number one. Or if you don't do that, you can just click in your data again and come over to the insert tab, and there's a pivot table option right here. It also has a drop down list which you can actually click and check from table or range. That's an option that you have, or from an external data source. I will be showing you how to do both. Our interest is to summarize this particular huge data set that we have here with a pivot table report. So let us use this approach here. I say summarize with pivot table. This will still land you onto this particular dialog box. And in here, you have a number of things, a number of choices to make. The first one is pre-selected for you. The table or range has been defined because we actually started our operation from the table itself. And then we need to choose where we want to build or to place the pivot table report. By default, it will create a new worksheet. And if that is, if you do not have set up the worksheets already where you want to do your analysis, you can go with this option. That will always be the default behavior. But for me, for this particular example, we already have a worksheet where we want to demonstrate that. Are we there? We have this worksheet here, which I've called how to create pivots, and we want to use it to demonstrate how we create a pivot table for the first time. Okay, but of course, for your case in real world, you'll always have this option which you can always use, because we say whenever you're doing analysis, whenever you're working on a project, make sure that each individual pivot table sits in their own worksheet. But as you advance your understanding of how to use this tool, you may find yourself running all your analysis in one single worksheet, like it has been in our previous classes, especially dashboard designing. We have been running these pivots in one worksheet, but it's not an advised kind of method. Okay, let's do existing worksheet. And in here, you'll see the location. I'm asked to give the location, and that's the operation I'm going to be doing. But again, we also have another option here, which says choose whether you want to analyze multiple tables. So when we are doing that, it's like we are picking these tables from a data model, or we can actually add this one into an existing data model. We do not have a data model existing in this workbook. This data model class is a class that is coming on its own, and we shall be letting you know when it will be available. Understand how to work with data models or data modeling. Okay, let us go in here and select our worksheet, which I've called how to create pivots, and you can see it's right here showing in my dialog box. What I can do is to declare which cell address do I need to place this particular pivot table report. I'll just place it either in any of these particular cell addresses. Maybe let me place it right here in cell C2, and you can see it's absolute cell reference here by default. Let me just say okay, and there you go. Now when you do that, sometimes you'll get this one stuck right here. This is what we call the pivot table fields pane. By default, it will be stuck on the sides here, but this is a floating object. This is something that you can pull off and move it around as you try to build your reports. And I like to do that so much. So I also grab it and hold it. You can see it's a moving object, like any other objects that we use. For example, when we are doing charts, you have seen these particular pens able to float on top of our worksheets. Okay, let me just expand this a little bit so that we can understand exactly what this one does. The pivot table fields. So everything that we do, all the reports that we build are built from this particular from this window here, which we call the pivot table fields pane. Okay, and we can also do some customizations of this particular pane here. One of them is changing the layout of how this particular canvas is laid out. You can come over to this gear icon, and then we have a number of options here. We can go field section and area section stacked together. That's a display option that you can pick, and this is how it looks like. And by default, by the way, this is always the default view that you will get for your pivot table fields. Are we there? And for me, I like to change it to this particular field section and area section side by side. I like to use this particular option here because it gives me room to look at all the field names. These field names that you're seeing here are not coming from the pivot table itself. No. They are coming from the raw data. These are the column headers. So the column headers for your raw data that you're working with will transfer and show inside your pivot table fields here. And because we're going to be doing analysis based on each individual column, that's why they are showing here. And we can drag and drop these particular field names into either the filters that we have here, the rows that we have here, the columns, and also the value field here. Okay, it's up to you. This is a preference issue. You can come in here and change how your stuff needs to be arranged. It's entirely up to you. Now let us build our first pivot table report and then look at some of the things that we need to know. Okay, let me just drag the region here into the rows. So whenever you're building your report, you can either drag the field name and drop it here manually, or if you don't do that, you can actually just click on this particular field name by placing a check mark. And Excel is wise enough to detect based on the data type that is sitting there in that particular column. It will actually find somewhere to place that particular field. Either if it has numbers or dates, or if it has text in it, whichever data type it has, Excel will be able to detect and place it somewhere. Sometimes it's not perfect, so you need to also know that you can drag it and drop it. You get the idea. If you do not use the placing the check mark here, then you have an option of dragging manually. So let me just place a check mark and see what happens where this region will be placed. I just do that right there, and there you go. You can see because we have text in that particular column, it has been placed into the rows. So Excel thinks that this is the report type we want to build. Of course, that is the report that we're interested in, and I believe here Excel has guessed it right. But again, I can just remove the check mark and drag it manually into the rows. Are we there? And let's just place a check mark on any field that we think has numbers so that we can confirm the behavior. So I'll just come over to any of the fields here. And maybe I want to look at the total revenue for each individual region. I'll just place a check mark here, and let me watch where this particular field will be placed among these 4 areas. I'll just place a check mark, total revenue, and there you go. You can see by default, it will actually place any column, any field that has numbers into the values here. And there's a default behavior here. In most cases, whenever you drop a column that has values in it, you might get a default behavior of summation. But that is something we can change when we start customizing our pivot table. Can come over to value field settings and change from the default, which is sum, to any of these functions here. But we shall go there in just a moment. Now, this is a report that we have just constructed. Are we there? And we can actually change how this report looks so that we can present it to our bosses. If this was the request that they made, that please show me the total revenue for each individual region. And we've just done this by just dragging and dropping. We never had to write any single formula. So if you are not yet good in formulas or remembering the syntax, then the pivot table is the choice for you that you should start working with. Are we there? So the number of formattings that I need to do here, I'll double click and change this from row labels. Maybe I can call this one regions, whatever you may want to call it. Just pick any name so that the report can become a little bit clear to read. And for the sum of total revenue, you may change this one into amount. Feel free to give any appropriate column header of your choice. And for this particular report, let's do some number formatting here. And what I always see people, the mistake most of us make is we like to do the number formattings the way how we actually do it outside the normal worksheet. With pivot tables, the way how you implement number formatting is a little bit different. Get the idea? It's different in a way that because this table will grow out together, will keep changing. We may have regions showing in the rows, and let me just come here and change this one. You get the idea? I change this one and maybe drop it into the filters. That will be a change. Maybe I grab it from the rows and drop it into the columns. That will be a change. Our pivot tables will keep changing. So every time they change, expect that the formats will also change. So the better method of giving or doing some number formatting here is clicking inside the numbers themselves or the report itself, and then you say right mouse click, number format. Or if you don't do that, if you don't follow that path, you can just right mouse click and come over to value field settings. Value field settings. While you're here, you'll see the number format option here. Just tap this particular button right there and you will land into this particular dialog box. And you can implement any format. Remember, in our beginner sessions, we talked about all these number formatting inside our normal Excel worksheets. But in here, this is how we do it when we are working with pivot tables. I'll say OK, and then come back here and say OK. This format will be implemented. And this report looks a little bit fine, but again, you can improve it by just, moving over to one of these tabs. And the options that you may have, you come over to the design and then pick through from the pivot table styles here that you have. Pick anything that blends clearly with your brand. For some people who have, their colors that they use at their organization, just have a taste of these pivot table styles. And in subsequent classes, we shall see how we can customize these pivot table styles like we always do for other styles that we have, especially to do with charts, slicers, and so on and so forth. Pick the one that works fine for you and go with that, okay? For me, I'll just leave it to the default, and this is our first pivot table report that we have built. Otherwise, we would have achieved this by using sum if s or one of the aggregate functions. Okay? Now, we need to move forward. Sometimes when we create reports, let me just go to subtotals worksheet here. Sometimes when we create a pivot table report that looks like this one in the screenshot, we get something called subtotals showing. For example, let's construct this same report here from our raw data. So I come back to the raw data worksheet and come back to the table design, summarize with a pivot table. I'll use an existing worksheet, and let's come over to the subtotals worksheet and build our report right here. Just choose any of your cell addresses and say OK. Now the pivot table fields will still open here, and I have the liberty to start constructing this report the way how it looks like here. And how do we do that? The first thing that I will drag into the rows is, let me just go with any. I can start with the region. I drag it into the rows. And because I'm seeing the sales channel showing, this is the offline. This is how we have performed in each region for each individual sales channel. Offline mode and online mode. These are the number of transactions or the sum of transactions that we achieved. That's the report we are reconstructing. So I'll grab the sales channel and drop it right here. You see, this is not looking fine. This is not looking fine. So what we need to do is to make sure that we move this one on top of the region, or we move the region below the sales channel so that we see what happens. Then how we move, we can grab and move through until you see that green line that keeps moving. In case you had so many rows, so many fields showing in just one single field, then you can keep moving, grab it. Are we there? And maybe you can also use the drop down. Sorry, I'll just click out. You can use the drop down here. Click in the drop down and you'll have these buttons. Move down, move to the end. These are the options. Move up, move down, move to the beginning, move to the end. So for this one, let us say move down, and there you go. You can see our report now is starting to construct, and it looks exactly like what we have here. Now, what I will do is to drop the total revenue into our value fields here, and there you go. You can see our numbers are showing up. What I can do is to do some formatting, and then we see how can we use the subtotals feature. What do we find it? Sometimes when you're constructing these reports, you may not need the grand total or the subtotals to show. Yes, especially when you're gonna be displaying these numbers on the chart instead. If this is not going to be the final product that you're gonna be printing out, maybe you want to have a visual out of these numbers, then sometimes you may not need the subtotals or the grand totals. Now you click in the report and come over to the design tab. You come here at the beginning, you see we have the subtotals icon here, or command. So for subtotals, we can click in the drop down. We all know what subtotals are. These are the numbers that you're seeing here. For offline, these are the subtotals from each individual region, and these are the numbers for each individual region, and this is the aggregate value for offline as a mode. For online mode, this is the number. So this is what we are referring to when we say subtotals. So just come over to the design tab. In the drop down for subtotals, you have a number of options here. We are just navigating these two contextual tabs. We've called the design tab and the pivot table analyze. And then we shall move forward and look at or construct more complex reports. Are we there? Now we have options of do not show subtotals. I believe if you do not want them to show, do that. Or you can come back here and say, show all subtotals at bottom of group. Of course, by default, when you construct this report, you will see the subtotals showing on the top. So you can come and change that one here. By default, it will be on the top. But right now, I've just put everything below the group. I can come back and change this. I can click in subtotals and say, show all subtotals at top of the group. That is the default behavior. Are we together? But to change that one, I've actually shown you. It's really very easy, and it's a preference. Sometimes you may want to show the entire report the way how it is. But again, whenever you are going to be displaying your report on a chart, please make sure that subtotals and totals or grand totals are turned off. And how do we do that? You come here. All right, let's move forward. I believe if we do not have questions, we may be tempted to move forward. So someone is saying, better late than never. This is bright field mode. Please, someone is saying what it is. Please, the screen is not visible. Is it not still visible, or it's now clear? Mark Ochacha, you're saying it's blurred. Mark Ochacha, you're still saying the screen isn't clear. I don't know. You might be having an issue on your side as well. You need to check. But I believe the screen is showing very fine for the rest of us. All right, let's move forward and look at the grand totals feature. Now we have a gigantic report that looks like this one. This is just a screenshot. And this particular gigantic report has some grand totals and subtotals in it. Let us see or reconstruct this report and see how we can use the grand totals and the how we can turn on and off the grand totals feature. So Adrico, Godfrey, you're saying it's clear. Check your internet connectivity. Yes, someone needs to check their internet connectivity. Yes, thanks Adrico for that particular comment. Let's move forward and reconstruct this report. Seems a little bit big or gigantic, but let's do that. I'll come back to the raw data, table design, summarize with the pivot table, existing worksheet, and we're going to be building our report from here. I just scroll to the sides and place my report here. Then I say, okay, so let us reconstruct this from scratch. And then I show you how to use the grand totals feature. Okay. But again, it's up to you whether to leave them on or off. Okay. Now, the first thing that we shall drag here is, of course, our region. Let's drag it into the rows. And let's also bring in our channel, our sales channel. And then make sure that it's up. I'll just grab and move a little bit faster. I believe everyone has seen how to do that. And the other thing that I will do is to make sure that I drag my order priority into the columns. Let's do that. I'll drag my order priority into the columns. And this is the report that we are getting. We are starting to build this gigantic report here. So we have our sales channel and the region in this particular column. And we also have the order priorities in these subsequent columns here. We have the cancel, the high, low, medium, and then we also have the grand total here. Now let us drag in our value, total revenue, into the values, and there you go. Now this particular gigantic report here, let me just do some formatting here so that you can read the numbers properly. This report that we have here has some grand totals and subtotals as well. So we can still use the same design dialog, the design tab here, and we use the grand total option to turn these things on or off. Right there. The first option is off for rows and columns. When I do that, all the grand totals will not show. Let's do that. Are we there? We get our report now reduced in terms of size. Are we together? Now let's go back to the design tab and come back to the grand totals. Then I say on for rows and columns. So this is the opposite of the first option. I say on for rows and columns. This one was off for rows and columns. Let's do that. We are now reinstating our grand totals for both the columns and the rows. Are we together? So we have these grand totals for each individual row. And we also have grand totals in the columns. Let's go back and see what are some of the other options. We can say on for rows only. Let's do that and see what happens. On for rows only, and there you go. We have only deactivated and reactivated grand totals for rows only, and that's why you're seeing grand totals for this particular region here is showing in this particular column. Let's go back and see which other option do we have here. On for columns only. Let's do that. So the grand totals for columns will be reinstated, whereas the grand totals for rows will be turned off. That's how you can play around with your subtotals or the grand totals feature. Let me just check if we have any other comment here. I believe we do not. So let's move forward and look at some of the report layouts that you may have. Are we there? We are trying to get familiar to constructing these pivot table reports. But again, you can take it a little bit further and become crazy depending on how you want your reports to look like. But in most cases, you'll find that we are using these pivot tables basically to do visuals in most cases. But again, if you've decided to use pivot tables as your final report that you want to showcase, then you have to learn how to change the report layouts and make sure that you can bring out a visually appealing report. Let's move over to the raw data and then come back to the design tab and then say summarize with pivot table. We're going to be reconstructing a report inside our table layouts here. Let me check. Maybe we already have a report in this particular worksheet. Let me just go back and check. So inside the report layouts, we already have a pivot table report, as you can see. Now, what we want to do here is to test a number of layouts. The default layout, when you come over to the design tab, the default layout here is always the compact form, and this is how it shows. This is the compact form. You get, it shows like a hierarchy, the offline, the column that is sitting on top, or the field name that is always sitting on top. Let me just go back to my field list here. So the column that is always sitting on top will always, it's like you're building a hierarchy. You always see it on top here, and then the subsequent field names will show below that particular first field list that you've provided. Are we there? Now, if we change this particular view, I come over to the design tab and change this one maybe to outline form. Let us see what happens. If I say outline form, you see the changes? Have you seen the changes? So for the outline form, we get an extra column. Initially in the compact form, this offline mode and the region were showing in one single column. But with this particular display, or with this particular layout, which is the outline form, you can see each individual field name is sitting in their own column. Column A has the channel, column B has the region, and then column C has our total revenue. But we can reverse this. Let me just reverse for our people who have just joined so that you can notice the changes. When I go back to compact form, this is what I get. So it's up to you, by the way. It's an issue of preference. Whichever report works better for you, or whatever management is looking for, is what you should be putting as your final product. Let us explore another report layout here. I'll go for the tabular form. Let us check if the tabular form will give us a better view. So this one is almost similar to the to this layout here, which we called the outline form. Again, I believe you are not seeing the change. It's quite a small change. Let's go back to the outline form so that you can see the changes here. Are you guys able to notice the change? It's quite small, not easy to identify, but again, the change is there. So when I do show tabular form, you'll see that for our top group here, or for our subtotals, you'll see there's a line that will be added in there. But again, this is almost the same with the previous design or layout. And what we can do here is I come back to the design layout, and then I can say repeat all items. We basically have three forms: the compact form, which is the default, the outline form, and the tabular form. Pick whatever works better for you. And we also have these two options here: repeat all item labels. And this one works fine if you are either in the outline form or the tabular form. So if I say repeat all item labels, what happens is that wherever there is blank here, like it is for these particular sales, because the sales channel has just been showing up here as a main kind of field, we do not have the values showing in these other cells. So if you want to show these values, and maybe our interest is to unpivot this data and analyze it further, then we can do that. We can come to the design tab, report layout, and then say repeat all labels. You see this mode here, repeat all the way through, and the online mode will also repeat all the way through. Get the idea? And if you want to analyze this particular aggregate values, furthermore, you can actually copy and paste as values, and then you can move forward and analyze this group of data right together. And also, let's go back to the report layout and see do not repeat items. So you can do that to turn on and off. Okay, some are newer. For those who are seeing the black screen, let them go to settings and change all right. And then someone says my computer blackout using mobile phone, but I'm not seeing clearly. Definitely you need to go back to your mobile because it gives you a bigger, wider screen. Okay, now let's move forward to this particular worksheet here. Sometimes after you've worked out your report, you've seen this trick. We used it, I believe, in our previous pivot table class that we had. Was it financial reporting? I don't still remember. But again, we can drill down to reports, especially when you get suspicious of any number here. So this is our report that we have just constructed. I believe everyone right now knows how to construct a pivot table report. So if, for example, you want to look at Asia's numbers for the offline mode, what I can do is, if I want to investigate, what is this 1.3? Where is it coming from? What are some of the transactions that form this number? I can just double click in the number itself. I can just double click in the number. Once I do that, it will actually bring out all the transactions that form up that aggregate value that we are seeing here in the drill down report. Are we together? So this 1.3 plus is coming out from these transactions here. You can see all these transactions belong to one region, which is Asia, and they are all from the offline mode. This is kind of, giving you the ability to look at individual aggregate values and examine if there is any change that you may want to make. But again, you don't make the changes from this particular report, which is an extract from your original pivot table. If you want to make any change, maybe you have gone through and you observe the weird number, maybe in terms of the units sold, or maybe in terms of the calculations here, make sure you don't make the change from here. You can make sure you understand or grab the transaction number and then come back to the raw data. Make sure that the changes are done here, because this is the source. This is the source of all those reports. So make sure you grab the transaction number, search for it in here, and then make the necessary changes. Are we together? Let's go back and I will delete this particular worksheet and we move forward. Now, the other thing is we can connect to external files. Sometimes you may be working on a file as a group or as an organization, and maybe you have your local server somewhere, and that's where you want, or that's the file you want to use as the source. Get the idea? Sometimes we build our reports from within the same workbook. But again, with pivot tables, we have the capability to connect to outside sources. And that's what I'm going to be showing you practically. So we can work from within the same workbook where we have the raw data itself here, and then we can build our reports. But similarly, we can work or connect to external sources. How do we do that? Let me just go back to my desktop here, and I show you exactly how to do that. So I have a folder here on my desktop, which I've called server. So I'm just assuming that this is a folder that is maintained somewhere on a local server, and maybe you're accessing that using your local area network. Are we together? So we have some files in here, and this file has some data, and we want to connect to this particular file and see what happens. So what I will do, I'll open a whole new blank Excel file from scratch. And when this particular file opens, I will give it a name. Let me just give it a name as a practice, as a normal practice is, and save it somewhere. I'll just save it on the desktop, and I call it sample external connection. That's the workbook name. And then I will say, okay. Now let me also call this one sample external connection. I'm just giving a worksheet name here, so there's nothing much. Let me just zoom in a little bit so that you can see the cells. Now what we need to do is to use this particular file. This is a blank workbook. There's nothing in it. there's no any data here. The only thing we have here is a blank worksheet. Are we together? What we want is to make sure that we connect this folder, assuming that this was on a server, and then be able to analyze whatever data is coming from this folder or the source, so that anything changes in the source data, our report that we have built here will be able to pick up the changes. Let's do that and see. Now what I do, I'll come over to the data tab, and what I will do here, let me just check. If you have any questions, please let us know in the comment section. We shall be able to move there and pick your concerns. So please make sure that you can comment or ask any questions, and also feel free to share this particular class with any other colleague who you might think might be interested. Okay, so let's do that. I'll come over to this particular insert tab and come back here and click on the drop down here for pivot table, and then I say from external data source. That's the option. That's the option we need to use, external data source, and this will open the pivot table from an external source dialog box. So this dialog box here will help us connect to the folder that we have just seen on the desktop. Let's do that. I'll say choose connection, and this particular existing connections dialog box will expand. And what I need to do, because I do not have any existing connections to this file, I'll just browse for more and then move over to select the source. This particular file is on the desktop and it's inside this folder. I'll just open and point over to this file, and then I say open. Are we together? Once I do that, it will actually show me what that particular file has in it. It shows me that there is raw data that I can use, and make sure that this particular check mark here is ticked. First row of data contains column headers. That's very important. If you don't do that, then expect that you'll get problems in your reports. Ochepa Emmanuel, you're saying Mr. Bringi on following. That's good. That's fantastic. So let's say okay and see what happens. And for this one here, it says existing worksheet. Absolutely. It's where we want to build our report. Or we can choose new worksheet. Let us build it from here. E8. If you're not convinced with the cell address, then you can click here and change it. Let's build it from B2 right there, and then say okay. Once I do that, this will still launch into our blank canvas here, where we can start building our report. And you can see this one is called pivot table 4, but again, we like to know, as a rule of thumb, is make sure that you name all your objects. So this particular pivot table by default is called pivot table 4, but you can change the name. Change the name always before you start building or generating your numbers. So how do we change the name of the report? This is the blank canvas where we are building the report from, and this will be the name of our report. I'll just come over to the pivot table analyze, and the pivot name option is right here, and I will change this one. Maybe you just give it any name. They can say test external. That is the pivot name, because I'm actually demonstrating how to connect from external sources. That's what I've called this particular report, and we still get the same fields here. So these are the fields that are inside the other file. Okay, let's also look for the region and drag it into the rows. Make sure that I carry this somewhere, and we can also drag our total revenue into the values, and let us do some formatting here. Then I will show you what happens later on in case the other particular data or the source data gets new changes. Okay, so this is a report that we are picking absolutely from this folder. All together now, hoping that every time this folder is accessed by any of your colleagues, they do changes to the file. Remember, in this particular workbook, there's no raw data. Everything, it's actually relying on what we have here. It's an external connection. So anything that changes here will replicate here. Whether you have a chart, whether you have anything, any report that is pointing to this table will get the updates. Okay. Let's now go back to the data tab and look at some of the refresh options here that we have. Initially, when we are working from our original workbook that we started with, let us double check for all the reports that we built. Let me just check over right here. In case you moved over to the data tab and checked your refresh or your refresh options, you'll see only these buttons active: refresh all and refresh. These ones are grayed out from refresh status, from cancel refresh, and connection properties. All these ones are grayed out. But when it comes to the file or the workbook that we have connected to an external source, you can see when I move over to the data tab and under the refresh, you can see now the connection properties is active. That means the number of configurations that I can configure in here in terms of how often the refresh should happen. Remember, let me just explain something here. This file is, let's say, sitting on a local server somewhere, and so many people are accessing this file. So every time they jump into the office, they have to go in and change or update the transactions, whatever it could be for. Get the idea. And for you, you've built a report of that particular file. Are we together? If you do not work on your how the connection properties or how you should have the refresh come through, you might not, or you might end up presenting wrong data. If at all you wake up in one day and then you move in and print a report, if you have not configured properly how your raw data should refresh or how your report should refresh, you may present wrong data. I've seen that practically at my workplace. So you wake up and someone presents wrong values. Reaching the boardroom, you wonder how these things have been coming from my own machine. So sometimes if you don't want that embarrassment, make sure that you have configured your things properly. Okay. Now let us go through a number of things here. Refresh control. Last refresh, it will show you the time, the date and the time, and then you have this tick mark here. Enable background refresh. It's something that you can turn on and off. So background refreshing is the default behavior that you always have. But again, you can customize this behavior. You can also place a check mark here and determine the X number of minutes that you may want the refresh to happen. For example, I may say I want the refresh to happen in 1 minute. I will test that in real time so that we can see if changes will be able to flow through our report. Okay. By default, you'll get 60 minutes, but you can reduce this one to 1 minute, and maybe you can extend it to hours as well. Then we also have this button here that says refresh data when opening the file. So let us test all these settings here and see how they play out. Okay. If the display is not clear for some of us, please let us know in the comment. But in case it's coming through fine for most of us, please move forward and alert us so that maybe in future we can make changes. Are we together? Just come on the chat and let me know. Isabidi Emmanuel, you're saying hello. That's not a question. Isabidi, are you able to see the screen clearly? Is the voice coming through fine? You can let us know. Please let us know so that we can proceed, because I don't want to. So Mujisha Julius, you're saying it is very clear. I don't know why other members are saying the screen is not fine. I believe it should be fine for most of us. Now that Mujisha is confirming that everything is fine, let's move forward. Let's move forward and answer some more questions here in terms of analyzing this particular data. Okay, maybe the question could come in and say, what is the highest average unit price for our products? That is the question. What is, Kwisanga Analyst is also confirming that is very clear. Okay, what is the highest average unit price for our products. Now together, that's a tricky question, by the way. And let's see how we can construct that particular pivot table report. I just remove all the filters and come back to my table, pivot table analyze, and remove whatever is here. I remove the region because the question is now asking based on the products, what is the highest average unit price for our products. This time I'll drag our products. I believe this is the item column. I'll drag it into the rows, and there you go. You can see our products showing here. These are the products that we are dealing in. And what I will do, I'll just remove this particular second column, which is giving us the percentages. And let us now bring in the average. What we can do is also remove the total revenue and maybe bring in the column that has our unit cost. Let's bring in our column that has unit cost. And of course, by default, when you bring this one in, the default behavior will be summing up all these numbers. And I did say you can customize that behavior by either clicking on this particular drop down menu, and then you see the value field settings. Once you see this option here, you can click in and change the default from sum to count or average. Our interest to do average, so I will click on average and say okay, and there you go. You can see this is the average price. Let me just do some number formatting here, and I will say use 1000 separator decimals. So this is the average price, or the average unit price for each individual product that we are selling. If I wanted to look at the highest, then I can sort this one more time. I can sort it largest to smallest, and there you go. You can see office supplies is averaging $525 US. And that's how we answer that question number 2. Let me check if we have some question here. The shared screen is blurred, not clear. This is Statistics Association of Chambogo University. Kwisang Andes is saying, check your internet connection and quality of video that you're using. Yes, you need to go in and also tweak some changes in your tool, in your system, or in your app, so that you can turn on high quality video or high quality, I don't know, but again, you can follow this particular instruction here. This guy called Statistics Association of Chambogo University. Go in and check your connection and also configure your display or video quality to a much more higher, up to around 720, and you'll be able to see the screen clearly. Sam Anya, I mean connection from external. All right, we shall come back to that particular segment. All right, let's move forward and answer more questions here. And the other question is, maybe they ask you to, with this particular pivot table reports, they ask you to generate a report that shows product sales by date. Yes, there are a number of options of doing this particular report. So let us go through some of them. What I will do, I'll actually come back to my field or table analyze options and turn on my field list, and let us reconstruct this report. Okay, I will just remove the item. Our interest is to look at our interest is to look at a report that shows the products. So I will just maintain the products and maybe remove the units and put in the total revenue, I believe. So this one will show us the total revenue from each individual product. Let me just do some formatting here, and then we move forward and answer this question properly. So the question was, we need a report that shows our product sales by date. Okay. One option that we can use here is to drag the date column. We can look for the date column. Maybe we use the order date and drag it either in the columns here. Let's do that and see what happens. There you go. You can see by just doing what I've done, you can see this is the report that we have. If this report looks very good on your site, please move forward and use it. But again, to me, it's not that appealing. So we need to find a better method of how do we bring in our dates and show our products by sales, our product sales by each individual period in a much more appealing or pleasing view. Okay. This is one of the options, but again, if this is not appealing to you, then we can come back here and change. Maybe I can remove everything that we have here and then change this one and maybe take it over to the filters. Let's see what happens with the filters. I'll drop the order date into the filters here, and there you go. You can see we get a filter on top here. This means that we can filter for each individual day right there. And if I go for first, or this is 10th of January, sorry, this is 1st of Jan 2010, and I say okay, you can see this report will be able to filter based on the date value. But again, this is not also a better approach. So let us remove this field right there and come back to our pivot table analyze, and this time use the timeline option. Let us use the timeline option and see if this one can give us a good type of report. So I'll say order date and say okay. This one will construct a timeline. This is a timeline that we can use to filter this particular report based on the date value of our choice. Okay. Right now you can see it is defaulting to the month. I went together. It's defaulting to show the month names, but again we can filter this one. It's actually showing month names for each individual period in terms of years, but we can change that particular option. Just bear with me a moment. I show you how to change that. So this is something that we can change from the drop down here. You can see by default it will show all the months for all the years. We have data set that spans from 2011 all the way through to 2017. Now we can change this one to years, and let's see what happens. We have data set spanning from 2010 all the way through to 2017. Now, if you wanted to see at numbers for 2010 alone, we can just pick this particular period, and there you go. You see a report will filter. If I want to look at 2011, I can do the same. This is a very easy method that we can use. Of course, we can also go with the other two methods that I did show you. But again, this is quite easy and appealing. If I want to check 2012, I can do that. This is one of the visual filters that you can have out together on top of the slicers that I'm going to be showing you in just a second. Now, we can actually change this one and show in quarters. Let's go for quarters. You can see this is quarter one for 2010 up to quarter 4 2010, 2011 quarter 1. You can also filter your report based on the quarters. You can similarly go month and days. So you have some flexibility here. And when you close, this will show all the periods. That's the default. It will show all the periods. These are the aggregate numbers. Again, you can take it a little bit further and show filter by years, or you can actually filter by quarters. Okay, so that's an option of doing a visual filter for your reports. Let's move forward and check the other question that we need to answer here. What is the total profit? Yes, so this particular question is quite tricky because when you check in our raw data that we are using for this report, we do not have the column that shows us the total profits. Together, we only have the units that were sold, the unit price, the unit cost, the total columns that we have. So how do we calculate the profit? Of course, there are certain columns that we have already noticed here that will help us do that. And how do we calculate that? We use what is called a calculated field. Are we together? Let me just close everything that we have here, and then we reconstruct this report. Maybe assuming we want to look at profits from, let's go with the products again, and then calculate our profits. What I will do is to click in the pivot table analyze option, and then come over to the fields, items, and sets, or calculations, and then pick calculated field option. Let's do that. Our interest is to create the profits, or look at the profits. I'll call this one profits, and the formula or the field names that will help us deliver that is, we want to look at the total cost of sales. We want to say total revenue, or total cost, total revenue minus, I double click this particular field name, and then I say minus the total cost. Okay, so this one will give us the balance, which is either profit or loss. So I'll say add, and then okay. Immediately I do that, you'll see this particular column will be added, and this is the profit that we have made entirely for all our products. Even though we've collected 19 million, 5 million is in profits, and the rest is cost of goods sold, or cost of, whatever you may call it. You get the idea. So that's how you do a calculated field. Let me check if we have any questions so that we can answer those questions. Otherwise, we should be, let me check. Isabel Emmanuel, I'm getting it clear. Yes, thank you for the confirmation. So it seems that your screen is now stable and we are good to go. Okay, so this is how we add in a field that's not existing in our raw data, but we can use the calculated option to do that, or the calculated field option, because we never had that particular field. The other manual step that you would have taken is to come over to your raw data and add that particular column in here, and then you can also use it as you construct your report. But again, that's not, that's a manual method. That means you have to create a new column inside your raw data. But when you work it out using the calculated field, it looks a little bit easier. But again, the choice is always yours. Okay, let's see if we have any burning questions here. If we do not have any burning questions, then we should be winding up this particular session. We should be winding up this particular session. But again, let's move forward and look at the visual filter that we called slicers. How do we slice our reports? For example, this is the report that we have come up with. I will come back to the pivot table analyze. On the filters here, we have another slice, another visual filter here called the slicers. We have looked at how to use the timeline. Now, how do we use a slicer? I just click on the slicers, and this will open all the available field names. So it depends on you what you want to slice this report with. Do you want to slice this report by region? Do you want to slice this report by country? Do you want to slice by whichever type or whichever field name is? Let me check. As if, yes, the recording will come through. And Oliver, the recording will immediately be available. You can actually rewatch immediately after the session ends. Okay, and that's the beauty of using this particular platform, so that I don't take time to wait for the recording and share it. It will be straightforward, available immediately after the live. Okay, now what I can do to create this slicer here, I will use, let's use maybe the region, and then say okay. So this is another visual slicer here, or filter that you can use if I wanted to look at the product performance and the profits realized for each region. I can do that. I can just click on the filter, and there you go. You can see the profits we got from baby foods in Asia as a region. I can remove or unselect this particular region by using this X or clear filter command, and maybe check another region. I can go for Australia and Oceania. There you go. I can X out. I can check Sub-Saharan Africa, how we are performing in terms of product revenue and also profits. I can X out. If I want to select more than one region using this visual filter here, I can do that as well. Let me check for Europe as well as the Middle East. So how do I do that? I'll make sure that I activate or mount select, or you can use the shortcut key Alt S to activate this option here for mount selecting your items. So I'll activate it and then select Europe and Middle East. There you go. We can see two regions are selected here, and these are the numbers for those two regions. So these slicers are in most cases used when you're working out dashboard reports. When we come back here in our report for designing dashboards out of our analysis that we do with pivot tables, I'll show you again more how you can customize these slicers. Okay, let me just remove the mount select option and then select one region at a time. So that's the visual filter right there called a slicer for you. And the other one, definitely we can always create visuals out of our pivot table reports. Okay, let's just construct one report here. I'll reconstruct this one here. Maybe what I will do, I'll come back to the fields or to the value fields option here, and let me remove the item and drag. This time let me drag the order date and drag it into the rows. Are we together? And there you go. You can see whenever you drag a field that has dates in them, you will see this particular behavior here. It will actually create some subgroups here and filter your values by years, show by quarters, show by month, and so on and so forth. But this is a behavior that we can customize later on. What I will do, because I just wanted to maintain the years, I will make sure that I drag all these other options that I'm not interested in. So I remove the quarters, I remove the month, are we together? And I also remove the order date right there so that I can maintain only the years. So this is the performance for each individual year. So if we wanted to actually showcase this on a chart, it becomes quite easy. Just select this entire table and make sure that your grand totals are turned off. Remember, we talked about whenever you're creating charts, make sure that your grand totals are turned off. So I'll come back here, grand totals, and turn them off. And let me actually highlight this entire table, or just click anywhere and come back to pivot table, analyze, and insert a pivot chart. Are we together? Or I can actually come back to the insert tab and come back to the pivot chart and click this option here. And there you go. You can pick any chart of your choice here. I don't know which chart might showcase these numbers very well, but again, let us check if the line chart can do it very fast. Or we can go with the bar chart, or we can go with the column chart, whichever chart type works better for you. We shall be coming back here to specifically look at charting styles, okay, or charting techniques. Which charts do you need to use, when, and how do you select the charts that you need to use in your visuals, okay? Maybe what I can do for this one, I will not really go deep to, formatting these charts. It's a class on its own, but again, that's how you can insert charts using your pivot table reports. Let me just bring back my filters here so that I can show you that if you actually activate a filter here, either as a timeline or as a slicer, also your charts will be able to filter properly. You can see the charts are able to update as well as you move forward with your filtering here. Are we together? The charts will be able to update as well. Okay. Let me check if we have any burning questions here. We seem not to have. So I believe we should be ending this session in the next 10 minutes. And let me check. If you have any questions, any issue that you'd like to bring forward, please do that so that we can handle before we actually end the session. We only have 10 minutes left. We can use these 10 minutes to answer some of the questions, please. Let us use these remaining minutes to answer all your questions. I'll be waiting for those concerns in the comment section. Please, let's use the remaining minutes to answer all your questions that you might have for this particular session. And in case you started with us, thank you for sticking around. I believe you have picked a thing or two out of this particular class. And in case the screen was not clear on your side, please make sure that next time you check the video quality and you turn on the high quality view. But again, it will consume some data. But again, if you want to benefit and have a better view of the session or the screen, that's the only way how you can get a better experience. Otherwise, we should be entertaining a few questions here and then we end the session. Okay? I'm not seeing questions coming through, so I believe everyone is doing fine. And if you want to actually follow along at your own time, the recording will be available immediately after the session, and you can go in and rewatch, rewind, practice, grab whatever might have passed away, maybe due to connection issues, and we shall be continuing these classes here every single Friday without fail. And now in our next session, we shall see how can we use pivot tables to completely design dashboard reports. So in that particular session, we shall be expounding more on how to make these charts a little bit more appealing, how we can deal with chart formatting, the styles, the charts that we need to work with, and so on and so forth. We haven't touched that today, but it's a class that will be coming through next Friday. So someone is saying, give a brief recap on VLOOKUP, how to put timeline and slicers. Yes, I can do that very fast. So when it comes to creating a timeline, for example, because we say the timeline is a filter on its own, so let's do that very fast. What I will do is to get rid of what we have here and then Control Z to go back until we get back our report. And then I show you one more time. Assuming this is the report that we have, if I wanted to actually slice this report using the timeline, I can do that very fast. I come over to the pivot table analyze, and under the filter options here, I'll say insert a timeline. When I insert a timeline here, it will scan through the data set or the raw data set that I have, and it will pick out only fields that have dates in them, only columns that have dates in them. You can see in this entire raw data set, we have order date and ship date. All right, together. These are the only two columns that have dates in them. So if you want to insert a timeline, we can pick any of these columns and say, okay, this will work out in the background, and then it will show you how it is right here. It's also another better method of slicing your reports. So by default, it will show, depending on the number of dates or the years that you might have in your raw data set, it will show you by month and break it down for each individual year. As you can see, the last period of the last year we have here is 2017. But again, this one goes back all the way through to, I think, let me just scroll through, just bear with me. It goes back all the way through to 2011. I believe we started in either 2010 or 2011. This data set is that huge. We have transactions since 2010 all the way through to 2017. So this is called a timeline. It's also a visual slicer to slice up your reports. Are we together? And we can change the drop down here. It shows in month, sometimes by default, but it depends. Whichever type of filter it shows at the time of you creating it, you can come here and customize it. Let's go and filter by years. I can do that. You see now our timeline is showing 2010 all the way through to 2017. If I want to only look at numbers for 2014, I just click here on 2014. You can see the selected period here is 2014. And you can see that by the color itself. The rest are grayed out, but this one seems to be active and popping out. If you want to select multiple, you can actually use this arrow here, this cursor. When you see it changing into the double pointing arrow, you can now drag. If I want to add 2013 on, I can do that. I can do the dragging. Now I've added 2013 by just dragging on my timeline. Are we together? It's taking some time to refresh, but again, you can see the numbers here are updating. If I want to add 2015, I can grow this particular selection from the right, and I add 2014 on my selection, and there you go. You can see it's taking some time for my PC right here. Seems to be a little bit slow. And there you go. You can see the numbers are able to update. If you want to only select one period, then do that as well. That's inserting in a timeline. And when it comes to VLOOKUP, I believe for VLOOKUP, what we did at the beginning of this particular session, we demonstrated, let me just go back to that particular worksheet where we demonstrated why Excel loves why pivot tables love Excel official tables or structured references. And we wrote a VLOOKUP formula here. And let me just remove what we have here so that we can do our simple VLOOKUP. So in data modeling, we call this one a facts table, and this one we call it a dimensional table, because this table contains only unique values, but this particular table can have records repeating, can have the same particular product purchased so many times. But in here, what we call the dimension tables in data modeling is only with unique records. And because this particular table, we can't easily use it to generate reports, are we together? Because we do not have the product itself in this particular facts table. So if they asked you how much did we sell for Apple, it might become very hard for you. How much did we sell for Apple? We do not have Apple in here. We only have the product ID, which is known to us, and we know that product number 1043 belongs to Apple. So if they ask you how much did we make for Apple, you have to first state or institute a connection. Out together, you have to make sure that you create a connection between this facts table and the dimensional table. We can either use our data model, we can use our formulas to do that, and in here we use the VLOOKUP. I'll say equals VLOOKUP. The lookup value is the product ID that is known to us, and the table array, we use this entire table from F3 all the way through to I3, and then move down, select the entire range, F4 key to lock it, comma, and for the column index number, we said pick from the fourth column, and the range lookup is 0, close off the VLOOKUP and enter. So this one gave us the price or the retail price, but because our interest is to get the total sales, we just came back here and multiplied this by the units that were ordered. Now that we have gotten the price, let us multiply the price by the units sold and hit enter key on the keyboard. This one ends up giving us 20,958, whichever currency of your local country. And I can now double click the fill handle and you will see our numbers populating automatically. The other one was creating a slicer one more time. Let me just do that one more time as we end the session for our colleague. I'll come back here and let's come back to the pivot table analyze. If we want to insert a slicer and slice this particular report, I'll just click on this option here and let us slice this by maybe by order priority, either by sales channel or by country or by region, whatever you may pick here. So all the field names will be available. Make sure that when you're picking the slicer, it's not a field that is already involved in the report. If the report has that field in it, please don't use it as a slicer, as that one will waste a lot of your time. Just always slice with the field that is not showcasing anywhere in your reports or in your pivot table reports. So I'll go for a region because it's not showing anywhere here and say, okay, I want to slice this report based on the region. This is a visual filter. Are we together? Let me just click on Asia and there you go. You can see the numbers change automatically. I can also go for Europe. You can see the numbers will update automatically. If I want to select multiple regions, I can either activate this particular mouse select option, or I can just select a region and then holding Control on my keyboard, select another region. Are we together? Holding Control on my keyboard, select the third region. So we are looking at numbers for Asia, Europe, and Sub-Saharan Africa. I've just used the Control key on my keyboard and then I kept on selecting the region name. If we don't do that and we want to select multiple regions, we can just activate the mouse select. Alt plus S is the shortcut key. Once you select this one, now you have the freedom to select multiple regions. Let's go for Sub-Saharan Africa, Europe, and Austria. So these are the numbers for these multiple regions that have been selected. Let me hope our colleague picked that one out, Taban Oliver, and we are good to go. All right. So we should be ending this session. Thank you very much for keeping or staying on the live up to this time. And until next time, in case we do not have any questions, let's meet next Friday as we discuss how do we use the pivot tables themselves to develop dashboard reports. Okay, we have not touched on how to create visuals or charts in that particular subsequent class. We shall see how to work with charts, the different charting techniques, and then how can we come up with final products like like dashboard reports. Otherwise, from my side, it's been wonderful having you on this particular class. Until next time, bye-bye.